welcome back to the show. My name is Chad, as usual. And today we have a very interesting Kickstarter that we're going to be talking about. It's unSEEN, unHEARD, Disability and Neurodivergence Comics Anthology. And I have three of the creators involved. So let me bring them in and let's find out about them and the project. Hey guys, how's it going today?
Hello.
Pretty good.
Thank you for having us.
My dogs have decided to start play fighting right when we began.
Of course.
So
Yeah.
I apologize if they get in the way for a minute.
No, that's fine. Wouldn't be the first time. So, before we get started about the project, why don't you guys, each tell me a little bit about yourself, and your experience as a comic book reader and creatively.
Sure. So I'm CK Carpenter. I started in the comics writing industry about 3 years ago. I've been published in a few different comics anthologies in that time. I've also edited Scott Snyder Presents Tales from the Cloakroom Volume 1. And now I'm editing the second project with unSEEN, unHEARD, Disability and Neurodivergence. So that's basically my history in the industry right there. Pretty short and sweet.
And what about as a reader?
As a reader, I go back all the way to the 5th grade. My friend Timmy started bringing New Warriors comics to school. This was back in the Mark Bagley, Fabian Nicieza run. And I got addicted to it because I thought Marvel Boy was the cutest boy I'd ever seen. And so I developed a fascination with anything Fabian Nicieza was writing. And so I've been a fan ever since. I got into the Image comics fairly early on because I was hitting right when all of them were leaving. And so I've been a fan of kind of indie comics world even pretty early on. So that's my history with reading.
Okay.
Aubrey.
Aubrey?
Sure, I'll jump in. So as a creator, initially I wanted to be a writer. Early on I wanted to be an artist, but I was kind of discouraged from that. So because my family was like, let's get a practical degree. And I was like, fine. But I still do a little bit of art. And then I wanted to be a writer, realized as I was writing comics that I really enjoyed giving feedback and editing. Ended up taking some classes in comic book editing and edited Tales from the Cloakroom Volume 1 with CK. And from there, I do a lot more editing than writing nowadays. I still like to write, and then I also took my hobbyist art skills along the way and turned them into graphic design skills and then eventually turned them into lettering skills. So I also do comic book lettering. For comics, it probably started with the cartoons, Batman the Animated Series, the X-Men cartoons, the Spider-Man cartoons, those kinds of things. And then when I was old enough to have a driver's license, I could drive down to Night Flight Comics in Salt Lake City and pick up my own comic books. So that's how I went along as a reader. And then probably from there, I went from, I really was into the DC stuff when I was young, but then got super into Marvel and stuff as I got a little bit older.
As for myself, my name is Anas Abdulhak. I'm originally from Damascus, Syria. As a creator, I've self-published in several works like Lithuania and Objects in the Mirror, and most recently published Etheris, which was nominated for a Ringo Award for Best Single Issue this past year, which was really, the crowning achievement of my comic book career so far, honestly, and a huge honor. Yeah, and I'm one of the editors for unSEEN, unHEARD. I'm very excited about this book. It's honestly been a dream to work with Aubrey and CK on this project. It's been the easiest experience of comics so far and the most fulfilling and rewarding. So I'm very pleased and honored to be here. As a reader, well, we didn't really have comics in Syria growing up, but we did have access to the animated cartoons. So I grew up with the X-Men, the animated series, and Spider-Man as well. And I was obsessed with superheroes since then. Got into reading comics, a bit older in my teens, and I got really into Marvel and Image and a lot of indie comics. And I knew that I wanted to write them someday, and here I am.
Nice. And I know that we all have very different stories on how we got into comics, but then I mean, all of your stories kind of, you know, resonate, with my experience. So before we get starting about the project itself, I think it would be nice for for people who don't know what neurodivergence is, if we could kind of lay what it is as a groundwork for our discussion about the project.
Yeah, so the project covers both disability and neurodivergence, which is a pretty wide scope, because like we say in all marginalized communities, like no one's a monolith, and even within specific diagnoses, no one's a monolith. So neurodivergency, even though we often see it associated with ADHD and autism, it is a much bigger umbrella than that, and so it's really important to highlight that because a lot of times people use ND as shorthand for ADHD and autism. But it covers things like bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, anything that's not neurotypical. Anybody who doesn't, just live life neurotypically, even severe forms of depression, things like that, can fall under the neurodivergent umbrella. And then for disabilities, I don't feel like I'm the most qualified to talk about that. CK, can I throw the football to you?
Sure. So, of course, disability has a huge range of conditions. So basically, as far as that goes, we weren't gatekeeping. So if somebody self-identifies as disabled, we considered that just as important as if somebody like me, who actually is recognized by the government and went through the horrible ordeal of trying to get approved for Social Security disability income, where the government says, okay, you are officially disabled and we are going to give you money based on what you paid into the system. That's how it works here in the States. So we didn't gatekeep there. We said, hey, if you find yourself disabled and you identify that way, that's fine. If you are officially recognized by the government, of course, that's fine. But of course, disability, I think we all understand kind of what disability is and how big of a range that scope is. I think neurodivergence is much more misunderstood as being pigeonholed as just ADHD and autism. And so I think that was more important to kind of explain. But I think disability is pretty self-explanatory there.
Yeah, and even within those communities with neurodivergence, a lot of people within the neurodivergence community don't always realize that they're disabled, that their issues they're dealing with are disabling. Even with me, I've had to kind of come to terms with how much I've white knuckled my way through life and how much ADHD and autism have disabled me and made my life a lot harder.
Yeah, I relate to that as well. As someone with very chronic depression, and it can be very debilitating. I have found it very disabling in the past couple of years, and it's been making my life very difficult. So, this project means to all three of us means something very personal, and that's why we came together and we wanted to make it happen.
So tell me about, give me a broad overview of, what the Kickstarter is funding.
Okay,
Go for it, Dennis.
No, take it. They could take it away.
Okay, so basically it's a 64-page anthology. It covers 12 stories. We're 50% neurodivergent stories, and then 50%, my dogs are going insane, and 50% disabilities. And there's not much overlap in the stories, except for a little bit of overlap with autism and ADHD, because there's so many angles you can come from when dealing with those conditions. And so the stories, even though they tackle the same condition, are wildly different. So we have that going on. We have made sure that 50% of each creative team identifies as disabled or neurodivergent, so that it stays true to the point of the comic. We didn't want to go for 100% because that can be really draining on people who, especially if they have a disability or if they're like ADHD and they tend to wait to the last moment to do things. It can be a range of finding difficulty there to put a team together. And so for somebody like me, for instance, who I'm disabled, I have fibromyalgia, I've had it for 20 years. Somebody like me, it's sometimes if I have 2 or 3 good hours in a day, I've got to not only work during that time, but I also have to take care of the house. I have to run chores, and somehow I'm supposed to find time to find a letterer and a colorist and an artist. So we decided 50% of the creative team was enough to warrant letting people get into the book.
Yeah, and we actually, like, without even really trying that hard, we had a very equal split down the middle, covering, a wide range of conditions and experiences. And, I found it very illuminating, like, and enlightening, just reading these stories that we have included, learning about these experiences and what it's like to live with these conditions. It was truly educational and heartfelt and, emotional. And I think a lot of people will find something to, enjoy from these stories.
Yeah, because I think we wanted to tackle each story from 3 angles. First, it's got to be entertaining, of course, because you're not going to read something that's not entertaining. 2, it needed to be in some form educational. All we required, it could run any genre. So we got horror, romance, sci-fi, fantasy in there, slice of life in there. And what we wanted to do is make sure that in some form it's educational. They have to tackle their condition in some way with the main character. And so entertaining, educational, and then finally very emotional. So whether it tugs at the heartstrings being inspirational or tugging at the heartstrings because it's a little sad or joyous, we wanted to just make sure that they were emotionally resonant. And so those were kind of the way we tackled each story, is does it accomplish these goals? And then we just kind of made yes, no, maybe columns and was like, this is a definite yes, and this is a maybe. And then ended up switching some of the maybes to definite yeses and things like that. And we had a couple of stories that unfortunately were amazing that didn't get in. So we're hoping for a volume 2.
Yeah, we really wanted to include so much, but we were like limited to a 64-page anthology for our funding goal and printing costs. So hopefully when we fund successfully, we will be able to create a second volume and invite a lot of the applicants from the first round back into the second book, because there was just so many good stories that we unfortunately couldn't include in our anthology.
Okay. So tell me about some of the stories that that did make the cut for the first volume.
Aubrey, you want to take the lead there? Because I don't want to feel like I'm talking too much.
You're good. Yeah, I mean, we just have a wide range that runs through a lot of different things. Like one of my friends I work with a lot as his editor, Ari Gross, has a story about OCD that has kind of a horror twist on it, which is really interesting. Doug Woods, like, these were in the preview, the three story preview that we sent out. There's pages on the Kickstarter if you want to go look at them to kind of get a feel for it. But Doug Wood has one about TBI and memory loss that's really just cuts right to your heart.
Yeah, it's very gut-wrenching.
Oh, it's so good. And then we have some, like, I find them more uplifting. We have one about like being an ADHD robot and trying to complete your tasks while struggling and like having a partner and being in love and those kinds of things. We have a story about autistic sensory overload, which I think does from what I've seen from previews of the art and what I know of the script, it does a really good job of showing what it feels like to be sensory overloaded. And that is so hard to explain to someone who's never had sensory overload. Like, I've tried to even explain it to my husband, who's also on the spectrum. Like, this is what it feels like. This is why I don't want to be touched when I'm overloaded, because it's just adding to the feedback and it makes it worse. And so I think we just have a lot of stories that run through different disabilities. And really, when we say educational, we're not meaning like you're sitting there with a teacher. We're saying we are showing you the inside lives of these people.
Yeah.
In very artistic and compelling ways. The Bone Cage, like, it's a creator dealing with, pain and physical disability and still
mortality.
Creating art despite it, So there's some pain in these stories, but also a lot of joy.
Yeah.
And a little bit of terror, I'd say.
I would say The Bone Cage and A Bone Reflective are some of my favorites. They both deal with, what it's like to be facing your mortality and realizing that your body is decaying around you and wanting to create and leave a mark, while you still can. And I think that's just a beautiful way to express it. And yeah.
In disability, like advocacy spaces too, we talk about how everybody deals with disability at some point, usually. We all age, and with age comes disability. Your body has struggles. Like, we often lose our eyesight, we might lose our hearing, we might lose our ability to move. Like my in-laws, my sweet father-in-law has had to he has a wheelchair now because he just can't move like he used to. And this is a man who has been active his entire life. He's an avid golfer. He still uses a recumbent bike because he's able to. So like with age, a lot of us face disability. And so I think that this book's important because it shares those stories, and we need to be aware of those stories and work to be allies and accommodate people within the disability community.
Absolutely.
So when you guys were, hey, did you pitch the anthology out and people submitted stuff to you and then you went through and kind of selected the ones you want, or
Yeah.
were
Yeah,
there
so
or did you approach certain people that you knew, were, you know, of this?
Of the community.
so
Yeah.
basic. Go ahead, Ennis.
We wanted to cast a really wide net and allow for creators who don't have a lot of experience within the comic book industry to, have a spotlight. And so we made an open casting call, basically open submissions, and anybody was able to submit their stories. We've gotten submissions from all over the world, and it was really like beautiful seeing all the stories coming in and people trusting us with their vision and their experiences. It was a very like beautiful experience for me. And yeah, we really didn't want to limit it to having established creators, because a lot of times the people who are in the disability community or neurodiverse can find it taxing to work in this comic scene and try to keep up with neurotypical and able-bodied creators on the same level. So we didn't want to like put that barrier of like, oh, you must have a certain level of experience or a certain level of fame or popularity. We really opened it to anyone. And we even have like a first-time creator in our book who's never written comics before, who's a part of our anthology, and we're very excited about AJ.
Yeah, we have two actually in there that I've never published before, so that's pretty exciting. And that was important, especially for me. I didn't want it to be a bunch of big names. I know a lot of anthologies are moving toward curating them now and reaching out, and which is perfectly fine.
Which
That's
is
a
not
totally
now.
legit.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, it's totally cool when people do that. Like,
Yeah,
I don't want to
exactly.
seem like we're
It's
putting
no,
them down.
that's what I was about to say. It's totally legit. But for us, we definitely wanted it to be open submission because I wanted people who've never published before to have just as much of a chance, and we treated every story equally. Like when we were going through them, we were like, regardless of the name attached, because we have great names in there, like Doug Jones, who's been published several times and a lot of anthologies, things like that, and kickstarted a lot of stuff himself. Richard Fairgray, who's extremely prolific. But we also, like we just said, have first timers in there, which was pretty important for me. So,
And we even like if people who submitted asked for feedback, I did my best to provide feedback to them because I know it can be inaccessible to people with disabilities and neurodivergencies. And so that was like something that was important to us too, because it can be really hard when you have to expend so much energy to submit. And so we wanted to make sure if people asked for feedback, we gave that back to them. Because it can be a hard industry, especially if you're just not sure how to navigate it and you have to pour so much of yourself into navigating it.
So do any of you have stories of your own in the anthology?
All three
yeah.
of us.
So yes, all three. But we did treat the stories like they had to be on par with the other stories that were found to be in the collection because we had an amazing caliber of talent turn out really great submissions. My story is called Step by Step. It's more of an inspirational story that just walks through the 20 years of me having fibromyalgia, from diagnosis and how hard that was to get, what the barriers I faced over the 20 years, to finally accepting it as part of my life and working it into how you can work a condition into your life. And it's almost like my best friend at this point because it's been by my side more than any real friend in the real world has. And so it's more of an inspirational story that's about finding that balance and learning to deal with a condition.
Yeah, mine's called The Ballad of Cassandra, and it's about autistic pattern recognition, although that's really just a footnote at the end. I was dealing with Autistic pattern recognition can feel a lot like you're constantly seeing the future, but other people don't want to listen. So that's why the nod to Cassandra. But it's about a bard who has this power to see things a little bit before they happen, and people being dismissive of that, and how she kind of owns it and is okay with it, like how she makes peace with herself with it. And so I don't know, it was a very personal story. And so I was really nervous. And I, like, when Chris mentioned earlier, CK mentioned earlier that, like, sometimes with ADHD, we push it right up to the boundary. I submitted my story, like, right when we were, like, at the end of the submission process. And I told them, because I knew beforehand, this is not going to be in your hands until then. Like, I told them, like, a month and a half before, because I knew when it was going to open. I knew when it was going to close. But I just knew I couldn't light that fire under myself to fully send it off. Like, I'd been working on it for months, but to fully send it off until I had that danger of the deadline.
My story is called Dependency, and it's a poetic exploration of what it's like to be completely reliant on medication to function. Having chronic depression that is pretty much debilitating. I am basically, relying on every dose every morning just to keep going through the day. So I wrote a poem about what it's like to live with that, and I'm working with Laura Helsby, who's a wonderful friend of mine and a great artist, to bring it to life, which is, right up my forte. It's my forte, really. I tend to incorporate poetry into my comics a lot, since that's my preferred means of writing. So I'm really excited about it.
And my collaborators are, I'll be working with Mike Morocco on art and Aubrey on letters.
Yep. And I'm going to be lettering my own story. And art is going to be by the talented Norin Nazca. So I work with them on a webcomic, and I'm excited we're both really thrilled to do this book.
Nice. So, kind of more into the nuts and bolts of the Kickstarter itself. What are the reward levels that you're offering, to get the project funded?
We've got a pretty wide range of rewards, actually, starting from like a very limited budget up to, high goals. Starting from $18, starting from $12, you can get the anthology as a PDF. And if you add a little bit on top of that, you can get a digital bundle, including comics that we've all worked on as the editorial team. We've either created or edited on or worked on in some capacity. And we've got a huge selection of comics there. That's really impressive. We have 3 physical versions of the book with 3 different covers. Cover A features the Pride Disability flag and a sort of protest, and it's by a good friend of mine, Al Acevedo. It's a very triumphant form of protest. It's like a celebration, really, of people within the community, featuring a wide range of experiences and conditions that can be seen on the cover. We've had a lot of people say, like, see themselves reflected in that cover, be like, oh my God, that's me. That's like how I identify. And we found that very beautiful. Chris, do you want to talk about the other covers?
Sure. So our second cover is a fantasy cover. We know there's a lot of discourse online about disabled people don't belong in fantasy settings. And so we wanted to push back on that a little bit and work with Arthur Cabezas to create a cover that deals with an amputee in a fantasy world and a wheelchair using person in a fantasy world. So we had that cover. We also have Skylar Patridge, who is pretty popular in the indie world and, of course, now going mainstream. And so we were lucky to grab them. And they did a cover for us that deals with ADHD. All 3 of our artists deal with some condition, just like we do. And that was important to us. So we put out like a call on Twitter to try to find a couple of them and things like that. But Skylar Patridge has been pretty forthcoming about their ADHD, and they created an amazing cover that kind of deals, and Aubrey can speak to that if she'd like, about how it relates to ADHD and all the things that are going on in your mind. The only one I'll highlight before turning over to Aubrey is the Get Drawn Into the Book tier, which is my personal favorite. We limit it to 5 spots. We'll give you the option, hopefully, to be able to draw into either a slice of life story, which would be mine, or a fantasy story, which would be Aubrey's, because we have a setting that would be perfect to work some people in there. And we've had 3 of the spots taken so far, but you get everything that we're doing. So you get the bookmark, you get all, you get the comic, you get the art prints, you get all of that. And in addition to that, of course, you get drawn into the book for only $150. I think we got 2 spots left there. So Aubrey, you want to finish it out?
Yeah, that ADHD cover, like when we got in the roughs, even I was like, oh my gosh, it's my brain. It was just like a really good depiction of kind of all the things you're thinking about, how your mind's never quiet. The only time I've experienced like quiet in my mind lately is I did start medication for ADHD, and that helped a little bit. It's still not quiet, but it's quieter. And then we have like a bookmark tier that has the disability pride flag on one side, and then Skylar's cover on the other side, because it just fit really well, and prints of all those covers. And I think the covers are so well designed and so unique that like they'd look great on. Obviously, I like to put art on my wall, so I've got they're good covers to throw up on your wall. So.
We also have editorial commissions, so you can get
yes.
it from either Anis or Aubrey. I sat that one out because of my condition. It would be too much on me to add to my plate in addition to the other stuff I have. But you can get an editorial commission from them, limited spots as well there.
Nice. So is this a first Kickstarter experience, or do any of you have, previous experience, using the Kickstarter platform?
We all have previous experience. Like Chris and I, CK and I did Tales from the Cloakroom Volume 1, which funded really quickly. So that was like a crazy experience. We had like the blessing, I would say, of Scott Snyder on that, because it's Scott Snyder Presents Tales from the Cloakroom, and it was students from his classes who wrote and created a lot of the comics in there. And so we had experience with that. I've had some adjacent experience with various writers that I've worked with as an editor. Like oftentimes I'm not like directly involved, but I'll like look over the page, or they'll ask me for advice, things like that. And then Ennis has done several of their own campaigns.
Yeah, I've done Kill My Boyfriend on Kickstarter, and I've done Objects in the Mirror on Zoop. So I like to think of myself as quite versed in the crowdfunding game at this point, which was all experience that we really needed, and it really came together beautifully. I think this has been a very smooth campaign so far. I was just telling CK and Aubrey, like, we haven't seen any stagnation in the funding so far, and we're really excited about reaching our goal and hopefully hitting some stretch goals, because stretch marks.
Sure.
Stretch marks, sure.
I'm hitting those.
Same. Hopefully hitting some stretch goals, because if we do that, we'll be able to pay our contributors more and more. So hopefully we can support them better.
And building on something Anis just said, is I think it's important to recognize all 3 of us brought different skills to the table. And so all of us had experience with campaign crowdfunding, of course, but everybody has kind of a different skill set, but we also overlap in certain skill sets. So like when one of us needed to take a step back from the project because our body was just getting overwhelmed, or we were getting overwhelmed, we've been able to pick up the slack there, keep the ball rolling. And then, I'm a great numbers cruncher. I love my spreadsheets. And so I was able to do certain things that maybe they either didn't want to do or weren't capable of, whereas they have a lot of graphic design experience and I don't. So they were able to handle that. So I think it's important to recognize too that it's just been a smooth process, and we've all been able to just kind of piggyback off of each other with our various skills and things like that.
Yeah, 100%.
Question for Anis. How your experiences between working with Kickstarter and Zoop, how's that been different? And because I chat with a bunch of the Zoop creators, or creators that do use the Zoop platform, and I've even talked with Jordan Plosky, and he's a great guy. So I'm just curious as to how your experience with both platforms has been.
I absolutely love Zoop. I think, well, being a small team, they can offer a lot of direct support to the creators. So they're a lot more hands-on in their approach. They really walk you through the entire process of putting your project together, and it's very thorough. And I really love that support, and that's why I chose them for my very first project, which was Objects in the Mirror, and I crowdfunded it on Zoom. And I thought it was, it went very well. They were very, helpful, fully, listening all the time and helping me with anything. For Kickstarter, and why we opted to go for Kickstarter this time around is, Kickstarter is the more popular platform, so there's a much wider user base that is, more inclined to support a book if they see it on Kickstarter than to choose a new platform like Zoop and choose to support it. Not to say like Zoop don't have a lot of trust from the community, because they absolutely do, but we also wanted to, make ourselves appealing and available to casual readers as well, who might just stumble across our project on the Kickstarter homepage. And so it was just to cast a wider net, really.
Okay. So is there anything else that anybody would like to mention about the project that maybe I didn't ask about?
Intersectionality is very important to us. So we wanted to make sure that we tried to include stories about people of color. We wanted to make sure we included stories about from the 2S LGBTQIA plus community. And so we have a couple of stories in there. It's amazing, and Aubrey can probably speak to this if she wants to expound on it, but there's a lot of overlap with neurodivergence and queerness and gender identity and things like that. And so we actually, even though some creators didn't want to tackle or didn't choose to tackle that aspect of queerness in their stories, we have quite a few creators who identify as queer in some capacity. So we really wanted to make sure we highlighted that intersectionality as well.
Yeah, it's just one of those things that there's a lot of just like ADHD, autism, and other neurodivergencies tend to have like certain comorbidities that pop up with them. Same thing with queerness. I think we just have a higher percentage of it in those populations to some extent, and it can be for various reasons. Like we've discussed gender, and for a lot of people who are on the autism spectrum, like gender just doesn't quite make sense. Like being forced to fit into little social boxes, because a lot of hierarchies just don't make sense to our brain. So it's been interesting to just see that kind of bear out as we read these stories and look through the submissions and things like that.
All right. Well, do you guys want to give like a final pitch for the campaign, and where people can find you guys on social media?
Anis, I think you're the best at summarizing things. You want to take charge there?
Sure thing. So please support our project. We have only a few days to go, and we're so close to funding our goal. You can find us very quickly at unseenunheardcomic.com, or you can head on over to Kickstarter and search for us. Unseen, Unheard, Disability and Neurodivergence Comic Anthology, 64 pages, 12 brand new stories from very different genres. We have slice of life, fantasy, romance, and sci-fi. So there's something for everyone there, something to appreciate and learn from, and maybe get something out of. And you can find me on socials at ns_Abdulhak. I'm on everything under the sky, and I'll defer to CK.
You can find me at C_K_Carpenter on Instagram and unfortunately Twitter.
You can find me, I'm Aubrey Lyn Jeppson, at Rebel Muse Comics on all platforms. The only one I don't want you to add me on probably is Facebook, because that's mostly family and friends. But if you add me, I probably will still accept you. But yeah, Threads. I mean, I joined them all as we were deciding which ship to jump on. Blue Sky, Threads, Insta.
Mastodon.
Probably a few I've forgotten about.
Hive, Kava, or whatever. Kara, Kava, whatever.
Kara, I'm on Kara.
Okay.
To some extent, I've just joined those just to have my name there to make sure someone else doesn't take it. So,
Aubrey, do you want to also maybe plug your website?
Yeah. If you would like to work with me as an editor, AubreyLynJeppson.com is a great way to I because I'm autistic, I don't like hiding like my pricing and stuff. Most of it's there. There's a few things you have to contact me for because it's just like it's a custom experience. But pricing and info about what I do and what I love to do is all on there. And now some advice about comics too. Like I occasionally write a blog about like what a lettering pass is or how to self-edit your comic book, things like that. Like usable resources.
Very nice. Well, I would like to thank the three of you for taking the time today to chat about the your campaign, and best of luck as you guys wrap up with a week to go, and we'll continue to plug it on our crowdfunding corner every Saturday at 12 p.m. Eastern.
Thank you so much.
Thank
That
you.
really
Yeah,
your
thanks for
support means a
having us,
lot.
Chad.
Yeah.
And hopefully, when you guys get ready to do volume 2, then maybe we'll have you back on and we'll see how this one ended up and see where the next one is going.
That'd be great. Thank you
I'd
Thanks
so
so
love
much.
that.
much.
All right. Have a great day, guys.
You
Thank
too, Chad.
you.
Yeah.